Hello. This video here is my introduction to you. My name is Robert Puhl, P as in Peter, U-H-L, and I'm going to tell you how I got to be in the safety business. How I got to be a safety professional. Didn't start out that way. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a long time ago. And when I was 17, college wasn't even in view for me. So I joined the Air Force, and it was probably a pretty good thing. I did, and got out of the Air Force and got married while I was in the Air Force. Looked around for a job, and I got one as a production manager trainee at a drapery manufacturing facility in Pittsburgh. I wasn't real tickled about going there, but I figured I'd give it a shot. Well, there were 3 production manager trainees hired at the time. I was the only one that stuck it out. And when I was done, I was actually running two of the plants. Two of the plants had moved to West Virginia, and I moved down there, and I was running both of those plants. And so that worked out pretty good for me. Unfortunately, they closed those plants, and I would have stayed with the company. Probably they moved everything to Hialeah, but they closed the plants, and I got another job. And about 6 months later, they called me, wanted me to come back. It was really fun for me to say, put it where the sun don't shine. So anyhow, so I started in the civilian workforce in 1968, and that was even before OSHA. And so I was at this plant in West Virginia, and this guy shows up, and he claims he's from the government. He's here to help us. Well, at the time, that wasn't as bad as it was now. So we believed him. We let him in, and he looked around and found some things. And the previous manager had left not too long ago. I was just taking over as plant manager, I think. And he was suspecting some theft was going on, so he put some slide bolt locks on all the 4 personnel doors, and that's a no-no. They were emergency exits. You can't do that. And so this guy wrote us up for it, which rightly so. I had taken him off before he left the building. I knew it was wrong. All right. So anyhow, and he saw an iron without a ground pin. And he started to write us up, take a picture of us. Wait a minute, what are you doing here? He said, well, this doesn't have a grounding pin. I said, I just bought this iron at Kmart. Anybody can walk in and buy this iron, and you tell me they're selling irons and they're not safe? So he said, oh, well, it must be double insulated, which of course it was. But so he didn't write us up. That's how they were back then. So anyhow, he got us up. We got a fine of some sort, and I appealed it just all by my little lonesome and lonesome, and we never had any correspondence after that. It got cut down to half. It was probably just about $200 something. So we paid it, and so that was my first cross with OSHA, and I had worked at relatively small companies for a long time, so I didn't have much dealing with OSHA. In 1978, I moved to California, and I was the plant manager there at a mattress pad company. And I just gathered all their accident information, and nobody had ever filled out the forms or anything else. And so I did, and they had the year that I got before I got there, they had 28 accidents. That was pretty heavy for them. So then that year it got 12, and then I got it down to 8, I believe, before I left. And it was there was no company policy on safety. I just didn't want my people get hurt. So the worst accident that we had there was it was a mattress pad manufacturing company, and we sonically quilted the material together. And when it went over, there was these things that came down, put pressure on it, and there was pins on this pinroll that made the pattern. And those things vibrated, and it sonically, it really basically melted them together. It was polyester. And one time we got a pinroll that was a larger diameter than the other pinrolls, and nobody noticed it, and I didn't either. So when they fed the material in, the old pinrolls were smaller, and there was a tension bar across it, and you could fit your hand on it, no problem. But this one was only about 3/4 of an inch away. It got his hand in there, and it degloved and took all the skin off the back of his hand. It was very painful to him. It was a mess. And then this is just a funny thing. One day, this insurance guy comes in, and he does this thing. Insurance for, I guess, fire insurance. They all come in, and somebody, I don't know what it was, workers' comp or fire, liability insurance probably. And he did this thing, and so he says, okay, I'll come back next week and check the sprinkler system, which means you run a test on it and the alarms go off. I says, that's fine. I says, but let me know. We've had some problems with false alarms and the fire department's not too happy with us right now. They're going to start finding us if we keep having them. So I said, so let me know before you do this. So like the next day, I look out, here comes a fire truck. What the heck is going on? And I look out there, I see this inspector out there. And I was very upset to say the least. So Jim Anderson was my right hand man there. So we go out there and I get in this inspector's face and I am mad. And I am telling him what I think of him. And he lied to me. He said, and he's never coming in my factory again. And I went, so Jim and I walked back into the plant and I said, looked at Jim. I said, well, I guess I gave him a piece of my mind. And he looked at me and said, Bob, I didn't understand the words you said. So I guess that was pretty bad. Anyhow, 1992, I went to work for a company called Bonded Fiber Products, a polyester fiber fill processor, also in Commerce, California, which was a division of Welma, which is a $1 billion company headed in South Carolina. And they had a very robust safety program. So in addition to my other duties, I took over oops, I messed up here. All right, I took over the other duties of safety, another duty of safety, and that was part of my modus operandi. When somebody left, if I could do their job, I did it. So for her, and also I found out that was pretty good way to get ahead. I learned a good way to get ahead was be in charge of NEW, N-E-W, and that stands for what nobody else wants. And dealing with the government notion is something most people just don't want to do. So I became coordinator of that facility, and I also learned pretty quickly that all bosses love is they want people to come work every day. And that's what I did. I came to work every day. That doesn't mean I didn't take vacation time or go to leave appointments or family stuff like that, but I was there every day. And if I wasn't going to be there, boy, my boss knew it. He never had to look around and say, where's Puel? Because he knew Puel was going to be there. So, and again, when somebody left, I assumed their duties. For example, one day I was walking through and Crescencio was the plant manager and Cindy was in the office and they didn't get along. And they're arguing about some purchasing or something. He took the inventories and she did the purchasing. And so the boss said to me, he says, look, I'm tired of these two arguing about this stuff. Will you just take care of it? So I says, fine. So I got them completely out of it. I just did them on inventories and myself and did the purchasing myself. And what that does for you, it just makes you more valuable to the owner. So we didn't have too much OSHA activity there, but one day a temp employee was walking through the plant and the mechanics were actually building a piece of equipment and it had chains and belts on it, stuff like that. And the temp agency saw some fiber in there. Well, it's a fiber processing plant and he reached in to pull the fiber out. Why? I don't know. And it ripped the tip of his finger off. And at the time, well, actually they started it. The temp agency who was there to workers' comp, they called in Cal OSHA, which is fine, which they should have done. And a couple of weeks later, the OSHA inspector shows up at the door. And my boss says, we never had an OSHA inspector there before. And he says, should we make him get a warrant or subpoena or something like that before they come in? And I said, no, I think we're in pretty good shape. So, okay. So we let her in. Her name was M.A. Kennedy. And the first thing that she asked us was to see the minutes of our next safety meeting. And I know what she was looking for. She wanted to see if this was in there because he wasn't our employee. Now, are we going to just talk about this or are we going to just, shove it under the rug? So I got out the minutes of the safety meeting and guess what? It was in there. All right, it's a good one for us. Then she wants to see our IIPP, which is Injury and Illness Prevention Plan or program, I forget which is required by OSHA. And they're trying to get federal, but it's a shame. All of this is a moneymaker for OSHA. And because what they do with your IIPP, they take it, you show it to them, they look at it, they flip through it, and they put it aside. And that's it. If you don't have it, they write you up. That's really all it boils down to. So on the way back, so she went out to look at the piece of equipment. Now, by this time, it was in operation and guarded everything. So, you never lie to OSHA by all means. You never tell them a lie, but you never volunteer any information either. So we didn't say anything. And so we're walking back to the office, and she sees a plug in a wall socket, a socket on a column, actually. She pulls it out, and there's a go ground pin. There should have been on this one. And she looked at us, and we're like, crap, you got us, And she says, fix it. She plugs it back in. So about 6 months later, I haven't heard from her. So I called her. Says, what's going on? She says, oh, don't worry about it. We just called it an Independent Employee Act, and there was no fine or anything else. So That was a good thing for me at the company there, because first time that the boss didn't even know I was doing all this stuff. And so I had it there, and that was great for him. And so up to now, safety was one of the things I was responsible for there. That was changed a bit, because a company called Western Nonwovens Inc. bought bonded fiber products. And the owner sent us an email saying he was going to send his entourage of consultants and stuff that he had and knew them, and invite around visit each facility. And we were supposed to have copies of our accident reports and our environmental reports and all this other stuff, all environmental safety stuff, ready to give to them when they came around. Well, just happened that ours was the last plant they came to. So they come into my office, and I hand them a stack of documents about 2 inches thick. They look at me and says, "What's this?" And I says, "That's the stuff you asked for in that email." And they said, "Well, nobody else had this." So they said, we'll get it later. So I set it down, and 6 months later, I shredded it. But I soon became the director of safety and environmental compliance for the whole company, with 11 plants in 7 states. So that was kind of why I became the safety director, safety and environmental compliance director, because I was the only one that ever had this information when I asked for it. So, but again, I still have too much environmental experience. I had a rainwater permit for a stormwater program, but it was pretty minor. And but there was a company that we acquired called Paltex. It was a small family-owned company, very profitable for the family, and but they didn't really pay much attention to environmental stuff. I went over there one time, and I says, it was the South Coast Air Quality Management District, was the government agency that handled air quality in the basin of California and Los Angeles. So I asked him, I says, "Where are your permits for your equipment, and for the air permits?" "Oh, well, Anna has a lot of permits." Okay, so I go in his office. "Hey, Anna, let me see the permits." So she had a folder on her desk that said permits on it. So I'm looking through these permits, and there's the permit for the dog in there, and the permit. So permit was a permit to her. It didn't matter if it was for the dog or for your equipment. They needed to run the plant. So, but anyhow, they had 55-gallon drums of various chemicals. Nothing really bad. I don't think anything toxic, probably, but they had, and for years, at least they didn't throw them in a landfill, throw them out. They just stacked them outside the plant. I mean, there was a stack, I don't know, 100 or so, maybe more than that. And so when I became safety environmental director, one of the boss said, "Do is take care of that stuff outside of Paltex." So I would go over there early in the morning, usually, and had to get some help, because we were wrestling these things around, and I tried to consolidate light chemicals into one drum so it'd be less to handle, and try to read the things on them and find out what they were and make an inventory of them. And it was a mess. It was a pain, but I got some kind of an inventory taken, a pretty decent inventory taken, and I put it out to 4 different people to bid it, 3 or 4, and got the lowest bidder, and they got rid of it and legally, and it made me look good, which is always good. And so now we were part of Western Nonwovens Inc., which was this conglomerate that has 11 factories. Nonwovens being a fiber that's made not like your shirt, where you have the one fiber going this way, one going this way, and they're woven together. Nonwovens are usually needle punched or something like that, so they're not woven. And so somebody called in for the plant Carson, which was the I guess you call it the main plant. It was the synthetic plant, and said, "Do we have any machine guarding?" Well, I showed some pictures to go and send it back to them. They still send an inspector out, and that happens sometimes. And this guy was from the aerospace industry. The aerospace industry are like spotless. They have to be. They're making stuff for the aerospace industry. We're in the fiber industry. It ain't spotless. So right off the bat, he was. We had 2 stories against us, and besides that, he was a jerk. There was a rotating shaft, and y'all know about rotating shaft, but it was on a bar with the fiber, big rolls of fiber fill came off the line. It was very, very fast, and that was a wooden belt on it, which we called aprons, and it was going very slow. He thought he wrote it up. Technically, if you want to get technical, it was probably an OSHA violation, but it wasn't a hazard. It wasn't spinning fast enough to be a hazard. So when we get to the first meeting with OSHA about it, he goes, "Oh, it was so fast, it was blurry in the picture." His whole picture was blurry. If it was that fast, this piece of equipment would have fallen apart. And I stuck a tack on it, took a picture of the tack, and it was going at about 20 seconds for a revolution, about 3 revolutions per minute. So you can see that is not going to be a hazard. But anyhow, we negotiated fine about half. And then in in 2006, at Bonded Fiber Products, that's one of the other plants. That's where I started working there and at the company. And a guy opened an access door to a picker, and the lock should have been a lock on it. The lock was laying on the floor. He was in charge of the machine, and he reached in to clear something out. I don't know why he did it. He had shut it off, but these things take about 5 minutes to quit running. It was actually not shut off. He knew this too. It was, everybody knew it. Besides, it was part of our blockout program too, to let it cruise for about 5 minutes so it stopped, let it coast. So it just ripped his hand off, complete off, and it was a mess. And he was, we called the ambulance in here, and in California, if you call the ambulance, they're going to call OSHA anyhow. But I called it into OSHA, and as soon as the ambulance left, and when the OSHA inspector showed up a couple of weeks ago, 3 times he mentioned that. He says, you called this into us about a half an hour after it happened. I says, yeah. He says, that's everybody else waits. You have 8 hours. I know that. He says, everybody else waits about 7.5 hours before they call it in. I says, well, what happened? What are you going to do? I call it in. It happened. Is what it is. So he came out and he returned it several weeks later for the closing conference. And we ended up with 5 less than serious violations, which was a big win for us. With the guy getting his hand ripped off, we didn't have a serious violation. And one of the things he did was he was in the conference room, and I went and got this guy's safety training file. Now, we had separate safety training files for everybody because personnel files are confidential. And so I showed it to him, and it was about 3/4 of an inch, half-inch thick. I says, do you ever see a safety training file this thick? It looks, I've seen personnel files like that before. I says, no, this is not a personnel file. This is his safety training file. And he looked at it. This guy was there for 15 years, and 15 times he was trained in lockout. So that helped us too. And then while I was in the LA one time, I was at LAX airport heading out, and it's crowded, normal. And I'm waiting for my plane, and it's a big corridor, and it's high, and this guy's getting out with this huge ladder. Right? It had to be at least 20 feet out, and this guy's getting up on the top step of this ladder, and he's looking around in the suspended ceiling, and I don't know what the heck for. So they come. I saw them down the hallway. They moved up, and they could set it up there, and there was a guy with a clipboard with him. And I thought maybe this guy with the clipboard was his boss. So I walked up to the guy with the clipboard, and I said, pardon me, sir, maybe this is none of my business, but this gentleman here obviously hasn't been trained in the proper use of a step ladder. He's standing on the top 2 steps of it. And this guy looked at me, are you with OSHA? And I could have flashed him my OSHA 30-hour card, but I didn't. I says, no, but I've been trained in it. And so I went and got a cup of coffee. When I came back, they were gone. The ladder was up against the wall. So I don't know what they did, but he didn't fall off and fall onto a passenger or somebody waiting for the plane anyhow. Again, in 2006, 2000 was a bad year for Western nonwovens. Temp agency in Sauget, Illinois, again, another temp agency employee. The line went down, and he didn't have anything to do because he couldn't work a lot. He didn't know what to do. So he was just hanging around. So he goes and finds a place that under the machine, this kind of hiding place. And for somehow he got his head caught in this moving belt on the floor. It wasn't very fast moving, and it killed him. And when they investigated where he was at, there was a lit cigarette, a partial can of Coke, and a cell phone. The cell phone was nearby. So he was kind of hiding from us. And I called it into OSHA, but I left the company before it was settled. So I don't know what happened on that. And also in 2006, Paltex, this company that I told you about before, about the parents, they had a guy that reached the floor, crawled under the machine, and in the front where the panel was missing, which you couldn't see from unless you were under there, and reached in to pull some fiber from a pulley, and amputated his finger. So we called there into OSHA, and they showed up. And they were kind of jerks this time. We got a $15,000 in citations. But we paid $5,940. But this had come to fruition after I left. So for me, it was pretty good because the guy they hired me didn't know it. Right after me, did not know what he was doing, unfortunately. And so they hired me to go back as a consultant and handle this. So I made another about a month's pay in a week going back as a consultant. And also happened at this Paltex plant. Yeah, before this, I just remember there was two cylinders that came down on the side where the roll fiber comes off. And this guy had been there for like 15 years, and he put his hand there where the cylinder comes down. Why? Who knows? And it messed up his hand a little bit. I mean, he survived, but it was painful. And so there was two guys on the off these rolls. So we put a control up with two buttons on each side. So they had to hit both buttons, to make this thing come down. So nobody can get their hand in it again. But it was a pretty stupid thing for him to do. But again, in 2006, I moved to Oklahoma, and I applied for a job at OK Foods. I didn't get it. I had somebody else. That happens. So this is what I did, and this is what I suggest you did. I wrote a real nice letter to the vice president of the company, thanking him for his time, asking him to hold on to my resume, because moving that light a little bit. That wasn't very smart, was it? Hold on to my resume, and just in case something happens. And to be honest with you, I always had something in the back of my mind that something would happen with OK Foods. So I went to work as a scale clerk for Jenny Lynn Quarry for about 7 weeks. I got home one day, and there was an email from this guy that was the vice president saying, just as I thought, this guy that we hired didn't work out. So if you want the job, you can have it. I won't even interview anybody else. So I called the next day. I said, yes, I do. I want the job. And OK Foods was a strange place to work, man. But I was there for, there were 3 safety directors in 11 and a half years. One before me, counting the one after me, was kind of 11 and a half years. And I was there for 10 of them. So the guy after me lasted about a year. So anyhow, about a week after I got started at OK Foods, the Heaver plant got notified that their process safety management program was going to be inspected by EPA. They hired a consultant, and 10 or 15 of us sat in their conference room every day, all day, for about 2 weeks, slapping together a PSM program. We just had to slap something to get through this inspection because we didn't have one. And I didn't even know what it was, to be honest with you. So we got through the inspection, and it was the best thing that happened to us and to me in a way too, because I didn't know anything about process safety management when I got there. And now I was pretty good at it because we went through all this stuff. So I learned a lot. And also I learned that we needed to have this everywhere, and it's something we should be doing. So I put together a corporate-wide process safety management committee. And we met every Thursday, 2 o'clock, for 2 hours every week for, I'm just going to say, a year, maybe longer, and has to get in a corporate process safety policy. And it was contentious at times, and sometimes we'll argue over a little bit. Sometimes people get mad at each other, but we got it done. And then we started meeting for 1 hour, and then we started meeting, and then we ended up just meeting once a month. We met for the corporate process safety committee, the corporate process safety management committee, anyhow. And so that was a good thing for the company because we got it in place. And then it was a good thing for me because I learned a lot about it. And also both the other plants, Muldrow and Plant 2 at Fort Smith, were also inspected by EPA, and we had programs by then, so we were in pretty good shape. So also while I was at OK Industries, of course, that's the rest of my career, was at OK Safety Group with OK Industries. When I first got there, Plant 2 was in the process of clearing out the whole plant, redoing the whole inside of the plant. And they had some CO2 issues, and they knew it, and they were taking care of it. By one thing they were taking care of it, they were going to get rid of the whole thing. So, but one employee called in to OSHA complaint, and when the OSHA inspector came, he said he wanted to speak to the OSHA inspector, or he was going to call in another complaint the next day. Now, if I was OSHA inspector, I'd have said, I'm sorry, we're not here to be used as a tool by you because you're upset. Goodbye. I'd have packed my bags and left and said, okay, if this guy calls, we're not coming back, because that's not what we're here for. he had a legitimate complaint, that's fine. But anyhow, he wanted to speak to the inspector. The inspector didn't know what to do because you'd never had this happen before because they're usually confidential. We didn't know what to do. We never had it happen before either. So I talked to my boss and he said, let me talk to her. So he talks to this inspector and he says, I don't think you should meet with him alone. And she says, why? Is he dangerous? And he says, you never know if he hasn't taken his meds. So she wouldn't talk to him. She gave him her card. And I don't know what happened to him after that. A while, another year or so later, he had some, he was considered a troublemaker at a plant. I didn't think he was that much, but he had some other issues. And guess what? We met with him and ironed him out. Some of his issues were legitimate. So, I mean, I didn't think he was all that bad. I kind of like it when people at the plant speak up if they're doing a valid, if they have a valid complaint, by all means. And one of the things this OSHA inspector did, though, was this plant was going to be demolished, this whole line. So there was a place where CO2 was coming out. So they stuck a piece of cardboard there so it wouldn't get out into the aisle and make ice in the aisle. Well, she took it off, the piece of cardboard out, and then came back later and there was ice there where people could walk. She was up with that, but she caused it. Anyhow. And then sometimes we had things called into OSHA and we just answered them and nothing ever happened about it. Most of the time, that's what happened. They'd send us a fax, we'd answer it, send it back to them, and I just all would hear of it. And in 2010, in feed mill, a driver driving for the feed mill to feed, take out the chicken plants, fell off the truck and broke her back. She wasn't paralyzed or anything, so she was okay. But somebody made a complaint to OSHA. And here's what they did in this particular one. They made a complaint about the trucks, which may or may not have been valid, but then they said other things too, which were just ridiculous. So if you're going to make a complaint about something, go ahead and make the complaint, but don't just throw other stuff in there. That's just ridiculous. So it was, so the inspector showed up. One of the complaints was, oh, it gets wet on the floor of the bay where the trucks come in. There's no doors on these bays. And there's some feed gets around, so it might get a little slippery, so it's slippery. So the inspector looks at us and kind of says, oh, so does it get wet in there when it rains? Like, of course it does. And we said, yeah. So she threw that one out. But we did get fined $5,000, but we went to Oklahoma City and met with them and they threw it out. We showed them what happened. We showed them how these trucks were. And then what really helped too, though, the plant manager down there, before this inspector got there, had already devised a way to get, she was on top of the truck to get samples out, to get retained samples of all the different feed. That's what they have to do. But he made a way to do that from a walkway that was above it that was guarded. And he put a hole in where the comes down, the chute comes down where they can get it from there. So that helped too. And then Fort Smith, on December 26, 2011, an employee claimed he was a sanitation employee, got his hand cut in a belt, and it cut his left hand off, and severed the elbow. There was no OSHA visit over that. We called it in, but there wasn't a lawsuit, but it was a mess. And he said he put the belt in, the hose in the belt, but the hose was laying on the floor and it wasn't hurt. So I'm not sure exactly what happened there and completely, but the guy did get a hand ripped off and that was too bad. In 2012, Fort Smith, the feed mill, there was and one of the CSB videos, they even mentioned this too, an NEP, a National Emphasis Program on Combustible Dust. Well, there is combustible dust in a feed mill. There's dust in a feed mill. And but his final report never mentioned the word dust. In fact, the inspector was pretty upbeat and thought we were doing pretty good. And he said he would do the closing conference the next day. And usually they would go back to their office and then call you about it or come back to do it later on and do it. And because it went that well. But when Roosevelt Shavers at OSHA got hold of it, it was a different story. We went down and met when this guy said, oh, in the solder, there could be pockets without any oxygen in it. And there could be pockets with too much oxygen in it. I mean, just completely ridiculous. I mean, the silo, this stuff comes in from and when it comes out the bottom, air, it's ambient air coming in. It's not sealed. There's no way it could have anything but ambient air in there. Anyhow, and then at plant 2 one time, a guy was moved, the fiber was being, chicken was being ground up and coming out this into the grinder, and there was a big plastic bin there, and his job was just to move that bin out and put it on the bin. And with some reason, he decided to wipe that thing off. Why? It didn't make any sense at all. But guess what? It did. He cut 3 of his fingertips off, just straight across like this. And we called that into OSHA, but nothing ever happened on that. But I had to go up there and the guy went to the hospital and took the guy home and everything. So I felt sorry for the guy, but he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing. And then in Oklahoma, an employee fell off a tanker truck. Now they had some issues, and they were loading from waste the back of the plant, trying to get it out of there. So they had it in 30 gallon containers, and they were like trash bins, and they wanted to get it in their truck. So they put 4 of these 30 gallon trash can containers on a pallet, lifted them up, and he was on top of the truck. He was pulling them off and dumping them in a truck. Well, he pulled one, the handle broke. He was off the other side. This guy was like 62 years old. He falls 11 feet onto a concrete floor. He ain't never working again. And he didn't, so I felt really bad about that. But the OSHA inspector came out, and he was very reasonable. We had a small fine. I didn't forget what for, but this guy was really reasonable about things. And then in Fort Smith, this was a mess one time. I was in the nurse station. This guy comes in, and my God, he was bleeding. And his sleeve was full of blood. And there were some big round knives, but when they were doing it, he was a maintenance guy. They weren't running. It wasn't operating either. So, but somebody called it on into OSHA along with 2 other complaints. One which said we didn't do any lockout training. They threw that out when we showed them documentation. But so we took the OSHA inspector back to see these knives, and there wasn't a lockout issue because it wasn't. They were just there. It was doing sanitation. They weren't running or anything, and nobody was working on them. He just reached over them. But the inspector saw a drip pan, and drip pans is what your stuff drips into and get it so it doesn't drip on your head or anything else. And it was too low. It was hanging too low. If I'd have been taller, maybe I'd have noticed that. But anyhow, so the inspector said we wouldn't get a citation on that, just a letter. And we had it fixed next day, and we sent him documentation on that. So we get this letter from OSHA, and it said the drip pan was less than 8 feet from the floor because it was in a walkway, in a path to the exit path. And the standard is not 8 feet, it's 80 inches. We photocopied the standard and sent it to them and everything, and they'd ignored it. So I called them. I said, well, what's going on here? We just said 8 feet. If 8 feet was the standard, any of your doors you have in your house or any doors are not legal. Oh, okay. I just don't worry about it. We're just a letter. They never would admit they were wrong. They would never clarify it. They just said, don't worry about it. We're just a letter. So with OSHA, man, it's like Forrest Gump said with the box of chocolates. You just never know what you're going to get. And March 23rd of 2015, in Heber Female, there was a combustible dust explosion, and it sent 2 contractor and a temp agency employee to the hospital. They were taken out in helicopters too. Fortunately, both fully recovered. And the inspector came in, was a certified industrial hygienist, knew nothing about feed mills, came back several times. She didn't want to say, we'll be at 9 o'clock, so at 9 o'clock. She shows up at 9:30. I know she had to come from Oklahoma City, but she's the one that set the date, not us, or the time. So we got about $100,000 in fines and paid about $50,000, but it was a lot of work and a pain in the butt. And this is the one where I went with our lawyer and another lawyer and to Little Rock, to an administrative law judge on this, and the OSHA lawyers were there, and they started talking about permanent required confined spaces. And I didn't get into an argument with the judge the first day because I really didn't want any argument with her, but I was trying to state my case, and she wasn't buying it. So, but the next day when we got back there, we were there for 2 days. She came up to me and apologized because I was right. So that was nice of her to do that. Now this is an accident that happened in Fort Smith, Arkansas. That was no inspection from OSHA either. But this young lady was a good employee, and she was driving a forklift. And she was driving a forklift parallel to the dock door, and she wanted to reach out button to open the dock door. So when she reached out like this to open the dock door, her left foot, we think, either slipped off the brake or hit the gas pedal. The forklift moved forward. Well, there was a big baller there to keep you from hitting the doors. So her arm caught between the upright for the rack and this baller. And it didn't break her arm, but pulled the muscles away. And that was painful. I don't know how it didn't break her arm. And she was off for a long time. We reported to OSHA after documenting we had retrained about 550 forklift operators, and there was no inspection. And and at one time in Hebron, Oklahoma, somebody cut their finger. Somebody called it into OSHA as an amputation. So we sent OSHA documentation from the emergency room that said it was a laceration and not an amputation, so we didn't have to report to OSHA. And it went away. There was no visit. But frequently, something was called into OSHA. They faxed it to us. We answered it, and that was it. And sometimes I was at the HR manager's office, and we had an OSHA complaint. I'd say, and I'd tell them, hey, we just had a OSHA complaint. He says, yeah, I know. I fired that guy this morning. Not surprised. Generally, OSHA takes complaints from current employees seriously, more so than they do from former employees, because they know that former employees are really just trying to make trouble for the company. So, OK Foods was bought by Bachoco, a Mexican company. They're still owned by them, and they're doing pretty good. I'm good. I'm glad they are. They sent these two guys from their safety or insurance. I'm not sure which it was. There was a real tall guy, and he was British, and he spoke a little bit of a British accent. He lived in Mexico, was married to a Mexican lady. He lived there, so he was a British Mexican, I guess. And then they had a guy who was a real straight guy, and he was Mexican. He didn't speak any language, any English. I mean, not any English at all. He didn't speak English. So the tall guy did all talking. The short guy didn't say a word. So guess what? I called them Penn and Teller. So they were pretty nice guys. I spent like a whole week with them everywhere, but they didn't really understand some things. Like one thing they didn't understand that, there was at Muldrow, there was some dry stuff, boxes and papers and shit stored under raw fluorescent lights. And they said, oh, you can't have that. I says, what do you mean? Why not? The ballast in those lights will melt and drip down and start a fire. I've been around a long time, and I've seen ballast that melt a little bit, but I've never seen them drip down and start a fire. I mean, I don't even know anymore if fluorescent lights have ballast anymore, but that was just, I mean, ridiculous. Especially we have like underwriters laboratories that handles things like that. These are things are all approved. We're a lot better than most countries, I think, in that regard. Anyway, so that's how I kind of went from a production manager, plant manager, into the safety business. I became the safety coordinator, and when it got bought by it, I was the safety guy because I was the only one who knew what he was doing. So I retired from OK Foods at the end of 2016. And soon after that, I was at a River City Safety Environmental Council lunch with Scotty McKnight, who was an adjunct instructor here at Carl Harbor at the time, was sitting next to me. And she asked me if I wanted to be a teacher, teach safety. And I said, Scotty, I don't have a teaching certificate. Never been a teacher before. She says, do you have a degree? I says, yeah. She says, that's all you need. So I said, okay. Well, she told me about Mrs. McConnell. And here I am, 5 years later, still teaching at Carl Harbor State College. And I'm pretty much enjoying it. So that's the story of how I became a safety professional. I hope you'll have a similar story one day. Mine was a good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working at OK Foods and being the safety director there. And I enjoyed it when in California, being the safety director there. It's a job that gives you some flexibility. You're not tied down. You can go out and play anytime you want to. You're not at your desk all the time. And so I like that. And because you weren't in with other people, you were on your own a lot. So you got to use your own brain and your own mind and do stuff on your own. And I like that too. Like a little bit of traveling I did too. So there's a lot of things that I liked about being a safety director. And I hope that in some of you in your career will become a safety director too and have a good career as I did. So thanks for listening to this. Now you know my story. Now I guess it's time to go to work. I mean, you, not me. I'm retired.